Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. Welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of the podcast. It's been a while since my last show, and I'm excited to be back. I'm starting this season off a little different than before. This episode will be part 1 of 2 in a series about queers with cancer, and part 1 is a solo show about me. Yes, me. Right in the middle of the first season of the show, I was diagnosed with cancer, but I was determined to keep the show rolling for as long as I could. So I did, until I couldn't. Part 2, in the next episode, I'll be interviewing a friend who has their own story with cancer. But for now, let's jump right in. So my story with cancer begins last summer. Last July, I was on a retreat with my husband up in the Redwoods in Northern California. And about halfway through the week, I just sat down one day and noticed a pain in my groin. And that was unusual for me. And so I investigated the pain, and it eventually went away the next day, I believe, or significantly subsided, but it was something alarming to be aware of. And I noticed that my left testicle was a bit swollen. So when I got back from the retreat the following week, I scheduled an appointment to see the doctor. And I went to see the doctor, and they did an examination, and they told me that they weren't that concerned about it because in their experience with cancer, usually there's not any pain associated with it, but they did feel a growth there. And so they scheduled me for a ultrasound appointment the following week, which I went to. And later that day, I got a phone call from the doctor who seemed a little bit more concerned and suggested that I see a urologist as soon as possible. So I got an appointment a few days later, and I saw the urologist. And that day in the office, he told me that he was going to do surgery on me a couple days later and remove the testicle. And at that point, he hadn't even seen any blood results that I had yet. And then just a few minutes later, my physician came in and told me that he got the results of my blood test, and there was high levels of cancer markers in my blood. At that point, that still doesn't determine whether or not anything was cancerous until they do a biopsy. But that was really scary. It was really alarming to me, and it was a lot of information all at once, and it happened really fast. And I freaked out a little bit, and they scheduled me for a CT scan. They wanted to scan the rest of my torso for any other lumps. So I immediately called my husband, and he went with me to the CT scan. And I had the CT scan, and they weren't going to get the results of the CT scan until after the surgery. So that was the scariest part for me, was waiting for the results of the CT scan because I had no idea what else could be in my body. So the rest of that day, I just, had a lot of feelings. I was afraid, I was scared, but I was also trying to be realistic about what needed to happen because I was going to have to take off time from work. So I had to let my clients know that I wasn't going to be in for a week, and I had to tell family and a few friends. And those were difficult phone calls to have with people as well. It was just hard to continue to tell the same story over and over again to multiple people and be confronted with my feelings every time I told the story, as well as being confronted with their feelings too. They were worried about me and concerned. So I really just had 2.5 days to get ready for the surgery. And I reached out to my homeopath who I had been working with, and she gave me some remedies that would help with pre and post surgery on a physical level. And I also reached out to one of my spiritual mentors and teachers, and she met with both me and my husband and was able to do some healing work for us and also created flower essences for me. And over the following weeks, the flower essences were really, really helpful on an emotional and psychological level. I'd never had surgery before or anesthesia, and I wasn't prepared for the side effects of that physically and emotionally and psychologically. So the flower essences were very helpful, as well as the homeopathy. So after the surgery, which went very well and was very fast, I was in and out of the hospital within 5 hours in the same day. And I also found out that same day of the surgery, the CT scan came back clear. So that was really relieving. That was probably one of the biggest hurdles in the first couple days that made me feel better. So the recovery from surgery was pretty simple. It knocked me out, and it was painful in my body just to have that kind of experience of having my testicle removed and just being cut into, and my muscles and my nerves dealing with that. But within 5 or 6 days, I was feeling a lot better. So then fast forward to a few weeks later, or maybe 10 days later, they had biopsied the tumor, and my physician and the urologist who did my surgery referred me to an oncologist. And the oncologist confirmed that the tumor was malignant, so it was cancerous. And he said that based on the diagnosis from the biopsy, that it was a stage 1 cancer. There are different levels of stage 1, which I wasn't aware of, but this particular level, he suggested one cycle of chemotherapy. And what that means is one cycle in this particular case is 3 weeks of chemotherapy. And the first week would be 5 days in a row for 6 hours. And the 2 following weeks would just be 1 day for 1 hour. And the reason that the 5 days in a row were 6 hours or more was because they were putting so many different chemicals through my body that were in over 3 liters of fluid. And so it just took a long time for that to happen. Now, prior to the chemotherapy, I hadn't really told very many people outside of my family and my immediate circle of friends, and I hadn't told my clients what was going on. They just thought that I was sick. But when I found out that I was going to have to be taking more time off of work and receiving chemotherapy, which was going to change my body, losing hair and gaining or losing weight and changing my energy and my attention, I had to tell my clients. And, I, on average, see about, 18 to 20 people regularly. So again, it was more just telling the story over and over again. And that was hard as well, because I feel a great responsibility to my psychotherapy clients, and I support them in their life, and I was going to be taking off time. And, for some of them, there was some guilt I had about leaving them, or afraid that they would feel abandoned by me, even though I wasn't leaving for good. I was just taking off a lot of time. So that was really challenging as well. But all of my clients were very supportive and understanding, and I was really grateful for that. Some other things that I did to prepare for chemotherapy was I started telling a few more people in my circle of friends, because I thought it would be really helpful to have the extra support both for myself and for my husband, because it was going to be, a challenging situation, and I'd never had that experience before, so I didn't really know what to expect. So what I did was I used an online platform that I know some other people have used before, that is basically an online interface where you can invite people to join it, and creates a private group, and you can create a schedule and post needs that you have, like meals or rides or visits or anything like that. And then people can sign up that way. And it makes it really easy because then you don't have to manage all of that. The website sort of manages it for you. And one of the things that is also challenging in this situation is that you have a lot of people, or I had a lot of people who were very interested and concerned about my health and well-being. And it becomes overwhelming to repeat yourself over and over again. So it's helpful to have this portal or this place where people can just check in all at once. I had decided not to post it on social media because there are so many people I'm connected with there that it was just going to be a big can of worms to open up that discussion with all these people and feeling like I needed to respond to them all. And so I kept it still very limited in terms of who I invited into this portal and people that I wanted around to help support me and my husband through the process. So I began chemotherapy, and yeah, it's not a fun experience. It's challenging, it's boring. And probably by the third day of the first week, because it was 5 days in a row that first week, is when I really started to experience some of the side effects of that. And I was informed about the side effects, but there were some side effects that I had that I wasn't informed about, or just didn't realize that they would all be happening at the same time. It's kind of like having a flu and food poisoning and a few other things all at once. I mean, from low energy to light sensitivity, sensitivity to touch and smell and sound, hair loss. I became very weak. It was hard for me to focus on any particular train of thought. I didn't really want to read a book or watch TV or anything like that. It was just hard to focus my eyes and to focus my mind in that way. So it's very disorienting and very ungrounding and unlike anything that I'd ever experienced before. So my husband was very helpful in creating a lot of structure for me in the household and communicating with other people. I asked him to communicate with people more regularly so I didn't have to, because again, it was challenging and took a lot of energy for me to respond to phone calls or text messages or email or anything like that. And he was also really good about asking people when they came over to wash their hands because my immune system was compromised as a result of the chemotherapy. And then just letting people know before they came in, like what my state was and that I needed the room dark and I needed people to talk quietly and I needed people to just talk one at a time. So it was really not helpful to have any more than 2 or 3 people in the room at once. But I did have a lot of friends and family visit. My parents came up and supported me from Southern California for a few days in the beginning. And then my mom came back again during the last cycle of chemotherapy and helped again. And a lot of people showed up for preparing meals because I didn't have the energy to cook and my husband had to continue to work during the day. And, asking him to do most of the work around the house, cleaning and everything like that. So it was just a lot of work and a lot of just managing your life in a very slow and conscious way that I take for granted, and I'm sure a lot of other people take for granted too. I mean, by the end of the first week, in some ways I felt like, an 80-year-old man because my energy was so low and I would get out of breath just walking up one flight of stairs or walking up a hill. And it just took a lot of extra effort and energy. So after the first cycle was over, I did go back to work for a couple of weeks. And I had another checkup with the oncologist. And he told me that they had actually done another blood test the day that I first started chemotherapy. And my cancer markers had started to rise. And that was a little scary and disconcerting, but he said that what needed to happen was to do 2 more cycles of chemotherapy. So I was not happy about that because it was so miserable the first time around. But in some ways, it was helpful to have the break and to know what to expect this time and how to prepare. So, I had 2 weeks off, and then I did 2 more cycles in a row. So that was 6 weeks in a row of chemotherapy again. And I had to take more time off of work. And again, I was really disappointed and frustrated that I had to stop work and tell my clients that I wasn't going to be around, but that was something that needed to be done. Just to give you some more information, if you're curious, what the doctor had told me initially was that without the chemotherapy at all, the possibility of recurrence was 50%. But with the chemotherapy, the possibility of recurrence was only 5%. And to me, 50% chance is way too high. So I decided to do the chemo and reduce my risk. And then he said 5 years after the chemotherapy, if it still doesn't return, then I'm basically at a normal level of risk, lower than 5%. So it's been a few months now since I finished, and I'm really grateful for all the support that I had. Some other things that came up during the experience for me was my psychological and spiritual experience. I continued to have contact with my spiritual teacher, who was very supportive and checking in on me and offering guidance. And, as I said, it was hard for me to really focus. And so being able to go back to my spiritual practices, particularly meditation and journeying, was hard. And, the best that I could do was to listen to guided meditations. Particularly Buddhist-themed guided meditations were some of the most helpful and powerful experiences for me. And also just really staying connected to my spiritual support on, an internal level was the best thing that I could do, just to maintain focus on healing and allowing my body space to not be stressed emotionally and psychologically so that I could heal. And then the other thing that I just want to share, because I talk a lot about alternative healthcare practices on this podcast, was I also had support from an herbalist, particularly after surgery was very helpful. And I also saw an acupuncturist pretty much every week for about 3 months. And that was also really helpful to just get my energy moving and to keep my energy up as much as possible for my body to heal. Because the chemotherapy is basically a poison. And so it's there to kill the cancer, but then my body has to deal with the chemotherapy, which is all the side effects that go along with that. It was also really challenging just to deal with the effects that this had on my body, not only just my energy level, but the way that it changed my body. So I lost most of my hair. I shaved my head and my beard because it just was falling out. And I had random patches on my body where hair had fallen out. And I actually ended up gaining weight, not losing weight, because there were some steroids given to me to help support the anti-nausea medication I was given, and also because I was so immobile for about 3 months. But, I'm fairly young still, and my body is bouncing back and recalibrating, and I have my hair back now because it's been over 3 months. And I did end up losing a few clients during that time, but I understand that they may have just needed support when I was unable to give it to them, which is understandable. And work and life are bouncing back now, and I'm looking forward to continuing to heal and regain strength. And for the most part, everything is okay now. I just have to have check-ins with my oncologist 3 times a year, and just to monitor my blood and to have scans once a year to monitor for any possible tumors that return. But for the most part, I'm very hopeful and optimistic about what's to come. So that is my story. And I hope that it is helpful for you to hear the story, because I'd never really heard anyone's cancer story, especially around testicular cancer or cancer in general from a queer person's perspective. And, a body is a body and cancer is cancer, but everyone's going to have their own experience and find community through that journey. And it's really helpful to have community and support. And so I hope that you can find what you need. And if you don't, that you can ask for it and you get that support. So that is the story of my healing journey with cancer. Listen to part 2 of Queers with Cancer on the next episode. I'll be speaking with a friend about his own experience with cancer. We'll be comparing and contrasting stories as well as answering questions from listeners. So stay tuned. To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. And if you enjoyed the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. This will help us reach and support more queer people all over. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.